Hey everyone, welcome to Rolling Hills Online. Wherever you are in the world, we're glad that you're joining us today. In addition to our online campus, we have two physical locations in Franklin and Nolensville. If you're in the Middle Tennessee area, we'd love to meet you in person. If this is your first time joining us, we would like to invite you to check out our New Here page at rollinghillscommunity.org. Here, you can find out more about who we are, what we believe, and what to expect when worshiping with us. If you've been with us before and want to find out how to get involved, please visit our Next Steps page. This is where you can learn more about baptism, partnership, missions, community groups, and more. If you're joining us live, we encourage you to jump into our chat. This is a great way to connect with our online community and further discuss today's message. In addition to the chat feature, you will find today's sermon notes and a link to the Bible so that you can follow along. Have something that you would like for us to pray with you about? Click the prayer request link at the bottom of the page. We would be honored to join you in prayer this week. If you feel called to partner with us financially, you can give online through the giving page of our website. Your support allows us to continue this opportunity to share the message of Christ around the world. So thank you. Again, welcome to Rolling Hills. We hope that you feel at home.
Good morning, church. I'm excited about today and what all God's going to teach us today. You know, as you look today, as we start this new series, it made me think about all the things that are out there and all the questions that people ask in life. And when you boil it down, I really think that there's four main questions that everybody who's ever lived has asked. Everybody who's ever lived has had to wrestle with these questions. And the first question is this, is who is God? All right, who is God? You know, and every philosopher, every theologian, every scholar has had to wrestle with who is God. Every civilization that's ever existed has had some form of worship. And so they come back to this question. The second question, I think, is why am I here? Right? Well, why am I here? How did I get here? I look around and I know there's something bigger out there. I know there's something that created me. So why am I here? And the third question, I think, that everybody who's ever lived has asked is, what is the purpose of it all? You know, I can see there's a solar system. I know I have a digestive system. I know there's order in this world, but what is the purpose of that? And the fourth question that everybody who's ever lived has had to ask is this, where do I fit in? Where do I fit? You know, what is my role in all this? What difference do I make? And these are questions, you know, if you do investigative reporting, you come with the 5 W's, you know, who, what, when, where, and why. When, we're going to leave that to God's sovereignty. We're going to leave that to science. They can figure that out. But we look at these questions and say, who is God? And everybody who's ever lived has had to wrestle with that. And why am I here? Why did God make me? Why am I unique? And there's nobody else in the world like me. And what is the purpose? Where is the meaning? As I look at all the things that I do and all the activities I undertake, where is the meaning behind all of that, and where do I fit? What is the lasting impact that I'm making? So philosophers and scholars and theologians, everybody has an opinion, and everybody throughout history has put their ideas in. And today we're starting a series that kind of wrestles with some of those questions and kind of looks at some of the deeper things of life and say, hey, what is it really all about? Well, this morning we're studying this book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible. And Ecclesiastes was written by a guy probably most likely named Solomon, who was the wisest man that ever lived. And Solomon comes to the end of his life and he's wrestling with all of these questions. And he looks back on his life and he's lived his life by not relying on God, by trying to do the things of the world, by trying to get caught up in all this, being successful and everything else. And he looks back and he says, did I miss it? You know, I went with the world. I went with all the thoughts. And really, did it ever matter? Now, what I love about Ecclesiastes, you know, it's this short book in the Old Testament, but it is so deep and it's so rich. And it's like listening to this guy who's at the end of his life. I mean, he's older, he's been successful, and he's recounting all the things of his life from birth to death. It's like, you know, people pay thousands of dollars to go hear Warren Buffett or to go hear Bill Gates, and they say, hey, here's what I did in the past, or here's the mistakes I made, or here's the things, and this is how you can be successful. And this guy, he had more money than Warren Buffett or Bill Gates, and he was more successful than them. And he says, guys, listen, at the end of the day, if you try to do it without God, you're missing it. And he just brings it home and says, hey, whatever you're going through in life, rely on the Lord. Rely on the Lord and hold on to him. So it's going to be a great journey. I hope you're ready for the next 4 weeks as we kind of dive into this book and unpack it. You know what? I moved to Tennessee 20 years ago. And I love Tennessee, I got to tell you. I moved from Texas. And in Texas, we had 2 seasons, right? It was hot or hotter. I mean, those were kind of our 2 seasons. And I get to Tennessee, and I'm like, this is awesome. In these 4 distinct seasons. And what I love, there's something about every one of the seasons that I've grown to love. But I think my favorite season is fall. I don't know about you, but I love fall because, you know, you've got the colors, you've got the weather's turning cooler, you've got football. My family loves to go on hikes, and it's just watching the trees and watching the leaves. And when you get to Ecclesiastes 1 and 2, which we're going to unpack today, it's kind of like this guy's in the fall of his life. He's lived all his life, and he's getting to the end, and the leaves are falling off, you know, and he sees winter coming. He knows he's going to die, and he looks back and he reflects, and he says, wow, for a lot of my life, I missed it. And I want to challenge you and encourage you, don't miss it. Because if you're trying to do things without God, it's all going to be meaningless. If you have a Bible with you this morning, I invite you up with me to the book of Ecclesiastes. Old Testament, right? It's kind of nestled there. If you open to the middle of the Bible, you may end up in Psalms. You can go to Psalms, Proverbs, and then Ecclesiastes is right there. And then if you get to Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, you've gone too far, or Isaiah, come back there. But Ecclesiastes, and we're going to be in chapter 1 and 2 today. It is just powerful what God's going to teach us, I pray, and will impact our lives. I pray for the rest of our lives that we will understand what life is really all about. Chapter 1, verse 1, pick up here. If you don't have a Bible with you, we'll put the words on the screen, or maybe you have a mobile device, you can access the scriptures online. But it says in verse 1, the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Now, Solomon never identifies himself. So some people think, well, hey, I'm not sure if it was Solomon who wrote this, but we kind of know, hey, teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem, most likely Solomon, all right? And it could have been somebody else from the genealogy of David, but Solomon, let me just tell you about this guy. Solomon was the wisest man that ever lived, all right? When he became king, God said, you can ask for anything, Solomon. And Solomon, right, if God comes to us and says, hey, you can ask for anything, you know, we would be like, okay, let's see, lots of money, lots of success, you know, long life. Solomon thinks about all those things. You know, he thinks about money, he thinks about success, and then what he asked for was wisdom. Brilliant, right? God, I just want wisdom. God, I've got to lead these people. I've got to be the king. God, I want wisdom. And so God made him the wisest man that ever lived. So we're learning, right, from these teachings from the wisest man that ever lived. But secondly, he was also the wealthiest man that ever lived. All right, I mean, this guy made, you know, if we put his wealth in today's dollars, it would be more than Bill Gates and Warren Buffett combined. I mean, the dude had a lot of money. So he's highly successful, and he looks back on his life, and in verse 2, he says this, meaningless. Exclamation point. That's encouraging. Thanks, man. You know, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. The word meaningless is used 35 times, if you're taking notes, 35 times here in the book of Ecclesiastes. And the word meaningless in the Hebrew literally means breath. It's out, it's gone, right? It's gone. It's a breath. Meaningless. And then he goes on, verse 3, and he says, what does man gain from all of his labor, at which he toils under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place where the streams come from, there they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one could say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. You've probably heard that saying before, and you kind of wondered where that come from. Well, it came right here from Ecclesiastes, right here. There's nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which anyone can say, look, this is something new? It was here already, long ago. It was here before our time. There is no remembrance of men of old. And even those who are to come or yet to come will be remembered by those who follow. Guys, get that. I mean, listen to what he says right here, right? There is no remembrance of men of old, and even those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow. That's a little depressing. I mean, you read that and you're like, thanks a lot, man. Thanks for the encouragement. I mean, where is it? He's kind of saying, hey, it's all meaningless. You're here today, you're gone tomorrow. What difference does it make? Then he turns to verse 12 and he turns to personal, right? It becomes I. And he says, I, the teacher, and that's how he refers to himself throughout Ecclesiastes, I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under heaven. And what a heavy burden God has laid on men. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I thought to myself, look, I have grown and increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced so much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also to madness and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. I mean, you read that and you're like, wow, that's hard. You know, I mean, really, is that what life is? But you know, Solomon's not the only one to wrestle with those questions, is he? I mean, people throughout time have wrestled with those questions. And especially as you get to the latter years of your life and you look back and you say, did I really make a difference? Was it really significant? There was a guy, Friedrich Nietzsche. You know, you've probably heard of Nietzsche, right? And Nietzsche came out of the Enlightenment period. And the Enlightenment period of reason and science and all of this, you know, we're trying to figure it all out. We're going to discover it within ourselves. And Nietzsche writes this short, essay called The Parable of the Madman. In The Parable of the Madman, Nietzsche says, hey, a madman runs into the village. And the madman begins to say, I seek God, I seek God. And the villagers kind of laugh because they go, oh, come on, you know, where is God? And then Nietzsche, who is actually the madman in this parable that he writes, says, look, we have killed God. Our culture, we have killed God. And think about the ramifications of that. Where is the meaning of the world? What does it matter? The madman goes on to say, why does the earth not pull away from the sun and freeze? And why does the earth not draw closer to the sun and burn up? Well, where is the meaning? Why does the sea not dry up? And he says, God is dead. And at that point, all the villagers look around and in silence begin to drop their lights and walk away. Where is the meaning? Where is the hope? What does it matter? All the ancients had a fear of death because they didn't know what was to come. Many of the ancients had a fear of the dark because they didn't know what was out there. And into that foray, C.S. Lewis writes this. C.S. Lewis writes, hey, if the whole universe has no meaning, we should never have found out that it has no meaning. Just as if there was no light in the universe and therefore no creatures with eyes, we should never have known it was dark. Dark would be without meaning. What C.S. Lewis is saying is this, is that there is a God who wants us to know him. There is a God who wants to say, it has meaning. And all of nature is calling out to you. And all of the world is saying, listen, God is sovereign. And we could go on and try to live our lives without God. We could go on and say, hey, it's all about me. But at the end of the day, it is God. And the only reason we know that we have meaning in our lives is because of him. Wow. This teacher goes on and says, hey, let me tell you about my life. And in chapter 2, he says, I pursued the things of this world. I tried to find meaning in them. And there were 3 things that I pursued outside of God. The first one is this. He says, I pursued pleasure. Pleasure. Now, doesn't this sound like our culture today, right? He says in verse 1, I thought in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. And Solomon, if it was Solomon, right, he did. I mean, he went after every pleasure of the world. I mean, the guy had men servants, maid servants. I mean, he had herds and sheep and cattle. I mean, the guy was wealthy beyond measure, silver and gold. He also had 700 wives and 300 concubines. All right? I mean, how in the world? I don't know. But, I mean, he did that. I mean, 700 wives, 300 concubines. He says in verse 10, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. At the end of the day, his conclusion is meaningless. And I think about how often in our culture, in our world, do people run after pleasure? Right? I mean, that's the big thing, right? And every civilization has had some form of that. You know, the gladiatorial games, right? Or chariot races. And for us today, we've taken it to the extreme. Now we got X Games. You know, it's like, man, we're going for the thrill. We're going for the rush. We want that. And we want to do whatever we can to be at every concert, every event, every pleasure, because somehow if we can get a picture of it and we can post it on Instagram or on Facebook, somehow we feel like we've achieved something. Somehow we feel like, man, look at me. I'm living. And Solomon goes, dude, you are chasing those pleasures. I've chased every one of them. And I'll tell you at the end of the day, it's meaningless. But we have places like Vegas who would say, come on, come out here, live out here, man, and take it to the extreme, and the gambling and the women and the smoking and all of this stuff. And we do that in our culture. Here's the things I think that define our culture. There's some statements, key statements that define our culture today. One, whatever makes you happy, to be filled, pursue whatever you desire. Doesn't that sound like our culture? Hey, whatever makes you happy. Forget about how it impacts other people. Whatever makes you happy, whatever you desire, and it all comes about inside, me. Like meaning comes in here. The second thing I think our culture would say is this: if it feels good, do it. Any expression between consenting adults is fine. Sound like our culture? Yeah, whatever you want to do with whoever you want to do, whenever you want to do, man, that's up to you. No thought to consequences, no thought to ramifications, no thought to what it's going to do to you or to anybody else. Hey, it's about pleasure. Come on. Number 3, believe whatever you want to believe, because truth is relative. See, that's what our culture says. Truth is relative. Hey, what you believe is true, it may not be true for me. But take that to a logical conclusion just for a second, right? So if you believe it's okay to steal, but I don't, or you believe it's okay to murder, but I don't, at some point it leads to total chaos, doesn't it? Everything implodes. It all falls in on itself. There is truth. There is a God of truth. There is a God who's sovereign. There is a God of order. There is a God who said this world has meaning and has purpose. The fourth one for our culture says pleasure is the ultimate purpose for human life. Now, that's nothing new. Our culture isn't nothing new under the sun. Lucretius, who lived 100 years before Jesus, wrote a poem called On the Nature of Things. And in that poem, he argued for pleasure being the center for every person. But it doesn't work. And how many people have pursued it, and how often do we get caught up into that trap to try to find meaning and purpose in pleasure? If I could just date him or date her, if I could just go out with them, if I could just have this experience, if I could, and it's empty. I don't know if you guys know this, but there's a big football game happening today. Newsflash, I don't know, it hasn't gotten a lot of reporting, but I'm just gonna let you in on that. It's happening this afternoon, and there is a quarterback for one of the teams named Tom Brady, okay? I don't know if you guys knew that either, but Tom Brady is probably considered by a lot of people to be the greatest quarterback of all time. Now, I know some Joe Montana fans out there might argue with that statement, but the fact is this: Tom Brady is a winner. And I would think for most American men, people would look and say, Tom Brady, man, that's the quintessential guy, right? That if I could be like anybody, I want to be like Tom Brady. I mean, he's won Super Bowls, he's got Super Bowl MVPs, he's married to a supermodel, he's rich, he's good looking, everything that most American guys would say, hey, that's it, right? He's got it all. A few years ago, Tom Brady did an interview with 60 Minutes, and here's what Tom Brady said. He said, why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think there's something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey man, this is what it is. Yet, I reached my goal, my dream, my life, and I think, God, it's gotta be more than this. I mean, this isn't it. This can't be all that it's cracked up to be. I love playing football and I love being quarterback for this team, but at the same time, I think there are a lot of other parts about me that I'm trying to find. You know what? I'm very thankful that he was as honest as he was. But I think when you read that statement, you realize, hey, wait a minute. There's more to life. And most of us are never going to be as rich as Tom Brady or as wealthy as the guy here in Ecclesiastes or have all of these things. But yet we still run after those like they're going to bring us meaning and purpose somehow, some way. And if I could save you a lot of time and a lot of money and keep us from going into debt, chasing after the things of this world, to just say, come on, for all of us, pleasure can't be our God. The second thing the teacher says, he says, hey, listen, I ran after pleasure. I tried to find meaning there, but I didn't find it there. But here's the second thing I ran after. I ran after knowledge. I ran after knowledge. And he comes back here and he says, then I turned my thought to consider wisdom. In all madness and folly, what more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise man has eyes in his head, while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. Then I thought in my heart, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said in my heart, this too is meaningless. You know, he comes back and he says, here I did. I spent all the time studying, researching, and I spent all this time and growing in wisdom and knowledge. And then I look around and I go, hey, wait a minute. I'm smarter, but have I increased my life? Or what difference has that made? Or what have I done? Or what impact is it having? Now, I'm all about knowledge. I love learning. My mom was a college professor, so we grew up, it was important for us, in college and graduate degrees, and all of that was important. But I think for our society as a whole, a lot of times that becomes our pursuit. Knowledge becomes our pursuit. I was driving down 65 the other day, and there was a big billboard that said, from pre-K to PhD. I don't know if anybody ever saw that one, right? Yeah. It was a local university, right? From pre-K to PhD. And I thought, you know what? That's a goal for a lot of people. If I could just get there, if I could have that, or that's a goal of a lot of parents for their kids. My kid will be successful if they get that graduate degree or they get that PhD. And yet, at the end of the day, it's important and it's good and go study and be in school and education, I'm all about it. But at the end of the day, it's empty if it's just living for that. You can be really smart in one subject and be a fool in a lot of other subjects, right? I mean, you can be a master's in something, but then look around and go, wow, I don't know anything about what else is happening out there. And Solomon, who was this guy who was wise and who studied and got to the end of the time and said, you know what? Me and the fool are both going to die. At the end of the day, I mean, really, here's what God says. 1 Corinthians chapter 3. He says, do not deceive yourselves. If any one of you thinks he is wise by the standards of this age, he should become a fool so that he may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness in God's sight. As it is written, he catches the wise in their craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise are futile. So then no more boasting about men. No more boasting about men. And I think what Solomon would say and what we start to see even in our culture in our day, hey, that can't be our God, little g. We can't just pursue that. There's got to be more to life. The third thing he comes back to in Ecclesiastes, he says, you know what? I pursued pleasure. I pursued knowledge. The third thing I pursued was work. Work. He comes here and he says, so, verse 17, I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me, all of it meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. Now, if it was Solomon who wrote this, most likely Solomon. Solomon was a master builder. You guys, this guy was brilliant. If you're any architects, I mean, this guy was unbelievable. He built the temple, which was, architectural marvel back in that day. He built palaces. He built fortresses. He conquered nations. I went to Megiddo when we were in Israel, and he had a stable for 1,000 horses and chariots. I mean, the dude built everything. And then he comes after doing all this work and all this building, and he starts to think at the end of his life, in the fall of his life, and he looks back and goes, wait a minute, I can't take any of that with me. Somebody's going to inherit all of that. And I don't know if they're wise or if they're a fool. I don't know if they're going to keep it going or if they're going to let it fall apart. I don't get to keep it. And I think about in our culture, in our day, how many people have sacrificed their family on the altar of career. And so often career can become our God, little g. And we run after it and think, man, if I could just be successful, I can get this promotion, if I can get this other job, if I can do this, if I can do that, then somehow that impacts my worth or that impacts my value. And we're always running for this. And Solomon comes back and goes, no, come on. There's something bigger than all of that. And here's his conclusion, verse 24. He says, a man can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in his work. This too I see is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the man who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. He says, guys, at the end of the day, it's all about the Lord. At the end of the day, it's all about him. And finding your worth and your value in him. And it's so easy for us, even as believers, to get caught up in the things, the pleasure, right, or the knowledge, or the career, and to all of a sudden shift and make that the destination of our hearts and our lives. And God is drawing us to himself and saying, no. Find everything in me. You know, Tom Brady, he's now won 4 Super Bowls. He won those 3 Super Bowls. He had a teammate. And not many people know about his teammate, but it was a guy named Gerard Cherry. And Gerard Cherry played in like 217 NFL games, but he was never a starter. He's kind of one of those Bill Belichick kind of guys. You know, he was just a hard worker. He played safety. He was on special teams. He was just out there all the time, working hard, being a part of the team. And Gerard Cherry has 3 Super Bowl rings as well. But when he won his first Super Bowl, Gerard Cherry said it was a spiritual awakening for him. He said, I got this Super Bowl ring and I just thought, there's got to be more to life. All my energy, all my time, all my effort put to this, and there's got to be more. He's living his life for God. He has a godly wife who's so involved in ministry. He's got great kids. And even today, he's a sportscaster up in Cleveland, ESPN radio. But he's a strong believer in the Lord. And one day, a few years ago, he was at a charity event that his wife was working with this charity. And he goes there and he said, I was watching people and they were just stretching. And I knew they didn't have a lot of money or a lot of resources. And they were investing in this charity, and it was to raise money for orphans. And it was building an orphanage there in Thailand. And I'm watching people put it in. And I went home that night and I laid in bed and I wrestled with God. And he said, I felt like God was saying, hey, they're short of money, but you can give. You can make a difference. And I was like, God, what do I have? And I looked over at my 3 Super Bowl rings. And I thought, what if I auctioned one of those off? I wonder how much that would bring. I wonder what difference that would make. And here's what Gerard Cherry said. He said, I looked at my 3 rings, and no disrespect to the other 2 rings, I easily could have given the second or third one, and nobody would have said anything. But my thought was, if I'm going to give anything that's sacrificial and supposed to represent my faith in God, I'd better give my best and what I care about the most. And Gerard Cherry took his ring and gave it. It was auctioned off, raised over $200,000. And there's kids, 24 kids in an orphanage in Thailand today who have a hope and a future because one guy said, you know what? I find meaning in the Lord, and everything I have is His. And whatever God wants me to do, I'm going to do. And I want to make a difference, and I want to make an impact. You know what, guys? For all of us, man, it's so easy to get caught up in the things of this world. It's so easy to rush from one thing to the next and to miss what's really important. And that's us investing in the things for the glory of God. We can rush from one season to the next, right? We get to summer and we complain because it's too hot and we can't wait for fall. We get to winter and we complain because it's too cold. We can't wait to get to spring, and we just rush through our lives. But I pray today that we would understand that here's a guy in the fall of his life saying to you and me, don't miss it. God gave me all of these resources. God gave me all these opportunities, and I wasted it on pleasure and on knowledge, and I wasted it on work, and I wasted it, and I didn't make a difference for His name and for His glory. And here I am at the end of my life, and I'm realizing what it's all about, and I think it's too late for me, but please, 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 please don't miss this season you're in. And when you and I begin to understand that, and we begin to live differently, we begin to live with meaning and purpose. One day Jesus was teaching, and a Pharisee comes up, and this Pharisee was trying to trap Jesus. And he said to Jesus, hey, Jesus, is it right for us to pay taxes? Maybe that's the 5th life most important question, I don't know. But he says, is it right for us to pay taxes, right? And what did Jesus say? Do you remember this? Do you remember this, what happened? Jesus said, well, throw me a coin. I threw him a coin, and he took the coin, and he said, whose image is on this coin? Do you remember this? And what did they say? They said, well, Caesar's image is on this coin. And Jesus said, okay, well, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and render unto God that which is God's. He threw the coin back. Do you know what? I bet if we were there, we heard the conversation keep going, I bet what Jesus would have said is this: whose image is on you? Whose image is on you? You and I were made in the image of God. And life only makes sense when we begin to live our lives for Him and for His name and for His glory. And when you and I begin to pursue other things, we get off track. Hey, I want to tell you, you know what? Life doesn't make sense. It becomes meaningless, and we're looking for purpose. But when you and I are founded in Christ, when you and I are growing in Him, man, it just doesn't mean everything's perfect, but it means there is a center and a foundation in our life that brings meaning and hope. And we get out of bed every day and just say, God, what are you going to do today? God, how can you use me today? God, I am yours today. And wherever I am, I want to trust you, because my meaning and my purpose is in you and in you alone. Life's most important questions, right? Who is God? He is the creator, the sustainer. He is sovereign over all that there is, and He is drawing you to Himself. He is inviting you into a relationship with Him and to grow deeper in your faith. Why am I here? You were created for a relationship with God. You were created for a relationship with Him. As the Westminster Shorter Catechism says, right? Our goal in life is to know God and bring glory to Him and enjoy Him forever. That's the chief goal of every man, to know God and enjoy Him forever. Hey, what is the purpose of it all? The purpose of it all is for us to live our lives for God's glory, for us to give back for what God's done for us. And how do I fit? You fit in the hands of a God who loves you. You fit into the hands of a God who gave his one and only Son for you. You are a son or a daughter of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And nothing else in life is ever going to satisfy, no matter how much you pursue it. It's only in him. So I want to ask you today this. Is your life meaningful or meaningless? Has there been a time that you've just said, God, I'm all yours, wholly and completely? Maybe today, you know what, you're a Christ follower, but man, if you're honest, it kind of started to pull away a little bit. It kind of started running after this pleasure, and it's all been about your worth and your value wrapped up in that. Or maybe it's work. Maybe it's your career. Maybe that's become your little g God. And yet God today is saying, listen, I love you. And I've got plans for you that are bigger than you could dream or imagine. Would you trust me? Would you hold on to me? Would you follow me?
Hey everyone, thanks again for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the service, and we want to encourage you to reflect on today's message throughout the week. Here at Rolling Hills, our goal is to raise up a community of disciples to be the hands and feet of Christ, and we hope that you will partner with us in doing so. How do you do that? Well, here are several ways. First, join us every Sunday, either online or at one of our physical locations. Join us as we worship our God and learn more about Him and His plan for us. Second, get connected. Check out our Next Steps page on the site to find out how you can engage with us further by serving or joining a community group. And lastly, we want to invite you to partner with us financially. You can do that online through the giving section of our site. All tithes and offerings go to support our ministries both locally and internationally, enabling us to impact lives and share God's Word. Again, we are so glad you joined us today. Have a great week.